Conclusion of the Mahabharata, the epic of ancient India condensed into English verse by Ramesh Dutt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Om123. Conclusion. The real epic ends with the war and with the funerals of the deceased warriors, as we have stated before, and Yudhishthir's horse sacrifice is rather a crowning ornament than a part of the solid edifice. What follows the sacrifice is in no sense a part of the real epic. It consists merely of concluding personal narratives of the heroes who have figured in the poem. Dhritarashtra retires into a forest with his queen Gandhari, and Pritha, the mother of the Pandava brothers, accompanies them. In the solitude of the forest, the old Dhritarashtra sees as in a vision the spirits of all the slain warriors, his sons and grandsons and kinsmen, clad and armed as they were in battle. The spirits disappear in the morning at the bidding of Vyasa, who had called them up. At last, Dhritarashtra and Gandhari and Pritha are burned to death in a forest conflagration, death by fire being considered holy. Krishna, at Dwarka, meets with strange and tragic adventures. The Vrishnis and the Andhakas become irreligious and addicted to drinking, and fall a prey to internal dissensions. Baldev and Krishna die shortly after, and the city of the Yadavs is swallowed up by the ocean. Then follow the two concluding books of the epic, The Great Journey and The Ascent to Heaven, so beautifully rendered into English by Sir Edwin Arnold. On hearing of the death of their friend Krishna, the Pandava brothers place Parikshit, the grandson of Arjuna, on the throne and retire to the Himalayas. Draupadi drops down dead on the way, then Sahadev, then Nakul, then Arjun, and then Bhim. Yudhishthir alone proceeds to heaven in person in a celestial car. There Yudhishthir undergoes some trial, bathes in the celestial Ganges, and rises with a celestial body. He then meets Krishna, now in his heavenly form, blazing in splendor and glory. He meets his brothers, whom he had lost on earth, but who are now immortals in the sky, clad in heavenly forms. Indra himself appears before Yudhishthir and introduces him to others who were dear to him on earth and are dear to him in heaven. Thus speaks Indra to Yudhishthir. This is she, the fair immortal, her no human mother bore, sprung from altar as Draupadi, human shape for thee she wore. By the wielder of the trident she was waked to form and life, born in royal Drupad's mansion, righteous man, to be thy wife. These are bright aerial beings, went for thee to lower earth, born by Drupad's stainless daughter, as thy children took their birth. This is monarch Dhritarashtra, who doth over Gandharv's reign. This is brave immortal Karn, erst on earth by Arjun slain. Like the fire in ruddy splendor, for the sun inspired his birth, as the son of chariot driver, he was known upon the earth. Midst the Saityas and the Maruts, midst immortals pure and bright, seek their friends the faithful Vrishnis, matchless in their warlike might. Seek and find the brave Satyaki, who upheld thy cause so well. Seek the Vojas and Andhakas, who in Kurukshetra fell. This is gallant Abhimanyu, whom the fair Subhadra bore, still unconquered in the battle, slain by fraud in yonder shore. Abhimanyu, son of Arjun, wielding Arjun's peerless might, with the Lord of Night he ranges, beauteous as the Lord of Night. This Yudhishthir is thy father, by thy mother joined in heaven. Oft he comes into my mansions, in his flowery chariot driven. This is Bhishma, stainless warrior, by the Basus is his place, by the God of heavenly wisdom, teacher Drona sits in grace. These and other mighty warriors, in the earthly battle slain, by their valor and their virtue walk the bright ethereal plain. They have cast their mortal bodies, crossed the radiant gate of heaven, for to win celestial mansions unto mortals it is given. Let them strive by kindly action, gentle speech, endurance long. Brighter life and holier future into sons of man belong. End of conclusion. Translator's Epilogue from the Mahabharata, the epic of ancient India condensed into English verse by Ramesh Dutt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Om123. Translator's Epilogue. Ancient India, like ancient Greece, boasts of two great epics. One of them, the Mahabharata, relates to a great war in which all the warlike races of northern India took a share, and may therefore be compared to the Iliad. The other, the Ramayana, relates mainly to the adventures of its hero, banished from his country and wandering for long years in the wilderness of southern India, and may therefore be compared to the Odyssey. It is the first of these two epics, the Iliad of ancient India, which is the subject of the foregoing pages. The Great War, which is the subject of this epic, is believed to have been fought in the 13th or 14th century before Christ. For generations and centuries after the war, its main incidents must have been sung by bards and minstrels in the courts of northern India. The war thus became the center of a cycle of legends, songs, and poems in ancient India, even as Charles Magne and Arthur became the center of legends in medieval Europe. And then, probably under the direction of some enlightened king, the vast mass of legends and poetry accumulated during centuries was cast in a narrative form and formed the epic of the great Bharat nation, and therefore called the Mahabharata. The real facts of the war had been obliterated by age. Legendary heroes had become the principal actors, and, as is invariably the case in India, the thread of a high moral purpose, of the triumph of virtue and the subjugation of vice, was woven into the fabric of the great epic. We should have been thankful if this epic, as it was thus originally put together some centuries before the Christian era, had been preserved to us. But this was not to be. The epic became so popular that it went on growing with the growth of centuries. Every generation of poets had something to add. Every distant nation in northern India was anxious to interpolate some account of its deeds in the old record of the international war. Every preacher of a new creed desired to have in the old epic some sanction for the new truths he inculcated. Passages from legal and moral codes were incorporated into work which appealed to the nation much more effectively than dry codes, and rules about the different castes and about the different stages of human life were included for the same purpose. All the floating mass of tales, traditions, legends, and myths for which ancient India was famous found a shelter under the expanding wings of this wonderful epic, and as Krishna worship became the prevailing religion of India after the decay of Buddhism, the old epic caught the complexion of the times, and Krishna cult is its dominating religious idea in its present shape. It is thus that the work went on growing for 1,000 years after it was first compiled and put together in the form of an epic, until the crystal reel of the epic itself was all but lost in an unending morass of religious and didactic episodes, legends, tales, and traditions. When the mischief had been done, and the epic had nearly assumed its present proportions, a few centuries after Christ, according to the late Dr. Boiler, an attempt was made to prevent the further expansion of the work. The contents of the epic were described in some prefatory verses, and the number of couplets in each book was stated. The total number of couplets, according to this metrical preface, is about 85,000. But the limit so fixed has been exceeded in still later centuries. Further additions and interpolations have been made, and the epic as printed and published in Calcutta in this century contains over 90,000 couplets, excluding the supplement about the race of Hari. The modern reader will now understand the reason why this great epic, the greatest work of imagination that Asia had produced, has never yet been put before the European reader in a readable form. A poem of 90,000 couplets, about 7 times the size of the Iliad and Odyssey put together, is more than what the average reader can stand, and the heterogeneous nature of its contents does not add to the interest of the work. If the religious works of Hooker and Jeremy Taylor, the philosophy of Hobbes and Locke, the commentaries of Blackstone and the ballads of Percy, together with the Tractarian writings of Newman, Cabell, and Pusey, were all thrown into blank verse and incorporated with the Paradise Lost, the reader would scarcely be much to blame if he failed to appreciate that delectable compound. A complete translation of the Mahabharata, therefore, into English verse is neither possible nor desirable, but portions of it have now and then been placed before English readers by distinguished writers. Dean Millman's graceful rendering of the story of Null and Damaynti is still read and appreciated by a select circle of readers, and Sir Edwin Arnold's beautiful translation of the concluding books of the epic is familiar to a large circle of Englishmen. A complete translation of the epic into English prose has also been published in India, and is useful to Sanskrit scholars for the purpose of reference. But although the old epic thus has been spoiled by unlimited expansion, yet nevertheless the leading incidents and characters of the real epic are still discernible, uninjured by the mass of foreign substance in which they are embedded, even like those immortal marble figures which have been recovered from the ruins of an ancient world and now beautify the museums of modern Europe. For years past I have thought that it was perhaps not impossible to exhume this buried epic from the superincumbent mass of episodical matter and to restore it to the modern world. For years past I have felt a longing to undertake this work, but the task was by no means an easy one. Leaving out all episodical matter, the leading narrative of the epic forms about 1/4 of the work, and a complete translation even of this leading story would be unreadable, both from its length and its prolixeness. On the other hand, to condense the story into shorter limits would be, not to make a translation, but virtually to write a new poem, and that was not what I desired to undertake, nor what I was competent to perform. There seemed to me only one way out of this difficulty. The main incidents of the epic are narrated in the original work in passages which are neither diffuse nor unduly prolix, and which are interspersed in the leading narrative of the epic, and that narrative itself is interspersed in the midst of more lengthy episodes. The more carefully I examined the arrangement, the more clearly it appeared to me that these main incidents of the epic would bear a full and unabridged translation into English verse, and that these translations, linked together by short connecting notes, would virtually present the entire story of the epic to the modern reader in a form and within limits which might be acceptable. It would be, no doubt, a condensed version of the original epic, but the condensation would be effected, not by the translator telling a short story in his own language, but by linking together those passages of the original which describe the main and striking incidents, and thus telling the main story as told in the original work. The advantage of this arrangement is that, in the passages presented to the reader, it is the poet who speaks to them, not the translator. Though vast portions of the original are skipped over, those which are presented are the portions which narrate the main incidents of the epic, and they describe those incidents as told by the poet himself. This is the plan I have generally adopted in the present work, except in the 3 books which describe the actual war, books 8, 9, and 10. The other 9 books of the translation are complete translations of selected passages of the original work. I have not attempted to condense these passages nor to expand them. I have endeavored to put them before the English reader as they have been told by the poet in Sanskrit. Occasionally, but rarely, a few redundant couplets have been left out, or a long list of proper names or obscure allusions has been shortened, and in one place only, at the beginning of the 5th book, I have added 12 couplets of my own to explain the circumstances under which the story of Savitri is told. Generally, therefore, the translation may be accepted as an unabridged, though necessarily a free translation of the passages describing the main incidents of the epic. From this method I have been compelled to depart, much against my wish, in the 3 books describing the actual war. No translation of an epic relating to a great war can be acceptable which does not narrate the main events of the war. The war of the Mahabharata was a series of 18 battles, fought on 18 consecutive days, and I felt it necessary to present the reader with an account of each day's work. In order to do so, I have been compelled to condense, and not merely to translate selected passages. For the transactions of the war, unlike the other incidents of the epic, have been narrated in the original with almost inconceivable prolixity and endless repetition, and the process of condensation in these 3 books has therefore been severe and thorough. But nevertheless, even in these books, I have endeavored to preserve the character and the spirit of the original. Not only are the incidents narrated in the same order as in original, but they are told in the style of the poet as far as possible. Even the similes and metaphors and figures of speech are all or mostly adopted from the original. The translator has not ventured either to adopt his own distinct style of narration or to improve on the style of the original with his own decorations. Such is the scheme I have adopted in presenting an epic of 90,000 Sanskrit couplets in about 2,000 English couplets. The excellent and deservedly popular prose translation of the Odyssey of Homer by Messrs. Butcher and Lang often led me to think that perhaps a prose translation of these selected passages from the Mahabharata might be more acceptable to the modern reader. But a more serious consideration of the question dispelled that idea. Homer has an interest for the European reader which the Mahabharata cannot lay claim to. As the father of European poetry, he has a claim on the veneration of modern Europe which an Indian poet can never pretend to. To thousands of European readers, Homer is familiar in the original. To hundreds of thousands, he is known in various translations in various modern languages. What Homer actually wrote, a numerous class of students in Europe wish to know, and a literal prose translation therefore is welcome, after the great epic has been so often translated in verse. The case is very different with the Mahabharata, practically unknown to European readers. And the translators of Homer themselves gracefully acknowledge, we have tried to transfer not all the truth about the poem, but the historical truth into English. In this process, Homer must lose at least half his charm, his bright and equable speed, the musical current of the narrative, which, like the river of Egypt, flows from an undiscoverable source, and mirrors the temples and the palaces of the unforgotten gods and kings. Without the music of verse, only a half-truth about Homer can be told. Another earnest worker of the present day, who is endeavoring to interpret to modern Englishmen the thoughts and sentiments and poetry of their Anglo-Saxon ancestors, has emphatically declared that, of all possible translations of poetry, a merely prose translation is the most inaccurate. Prose, says Mr. Stopford Brooke further on, no more represents poetry than architecture does music. Translations of poetry are never much good, but at least they should always endeavor to have the musical movement of poetry and to obey the laws of the verse they translate. This appears to me to be a very sound maxim, and one of my greatest difficulties in the task I have undertaken has been to try and preserve something of the musical movement of the sonorous Sanskrit poetry in the English translation. Much of the Sanskrit epic is written in the well-known sloka meter of 16 syllables in each line, and I endeavored to choose some English meter which is familiar to the English ear, and which should reproduce to some extent the rhythm, the majesty, and the long and measured sweep of the Sanskrit verse. It was necessary to adopt such a meter in order to transfer something of the truth about the Mahabharata into English, for without such reproduction or imitation of the musical movement of the original, very much less than half a truth is told. My kind friend Mr. Edmund Russell, impelled by that enthusiasm for Indian poetry and Indian art which is a part of him, rendered me valuable help and assistance in this matter, and I gratefully acknowledge the benefit I have derived from his advice and suggestions. After considerable trouble and anxiety, and after rendering several books in different English matters, I felt convinced that the one finally adopted was a nearer approach to the Sanskrit sloka than any other familiar English meter known to me. I have recited a verse in this English meter and a sloka in presence of listeners who have a better ear for music than myself, and they have marked a close resemblance. I quote a few lines from the Sanskrit showing varieties of the sloka meter and comparing them with the scheme of the English meter selected. Isha kunti shuta sriman, Isha madhyama pandava, Isha putro mahendrasya, Kurunama Isha rakshita. Mahabharata 1, 53-57. Yet I doubt not through the ages one increasing purpose runs, and the thoughts of man are widened with the process of the suns. Locksley Hall. Malansa samupudaya, Kanchanim samalamakritam, Avatirna tatorangam, Draupadi Varadarshava. Mahabharata 1, 69-74. Visions of the days departed, shadowy phantoms filled my brain. Those who live in history only seem to walk the earth again. Belfry of Bruges. Asurayam eva suryena, nirvatam eva bayuna, vasitam lharitam chaiva, krishnanedam sadohina. Mahabharata 2, 13-34. Quaint old town of toil and traffic, quaint old town of art and song, memories haunt thy pointed gables like the rooks that round thee throng. Nuremberg. Ha Pando ha Maharaj, Kashikim samupekshasi, putrena vivashayate sadhuna, ariviridhyuta nirjitana. Mahabharata 2, 26-10. In her ear he whispers gaily, if my heart by signs can tell. Maiden, I have watched thee daily, and I think thou lovest me well. Lord of Burleigh. It would be too much to assume that even with the help of this similarity in meters, I have been able to transfer into my English that sweep and majesty of verse which is the charm of Sanskrit, and which often sustains and elevates the simplest narration and the plainest ideas. Without the support of these sustaining wings, my poor narration must often plod through the dust, and I can only ask for the indulgence of the reader, which every translator of poetry from a foreign language can with reason ask, if the story as told in the translation is sometimes but a plain, simple, and homely narrative. For any artistic decoration, I have neither the inclination nor the necessary qualification. The crisp and ornate style, the quaint expression, the chiseled word, the new coined phrase, in which modern English poetry is rich, would scarcely suit the translation of an old epic whose predominating characteristic is its simple and easy flow of narrative. Indeed, the Mahabharata would lose that unadorned simplicity which is its first and foremost feature if the translator ventured to decorate it with the art of the modern day, even if he had been qualified to do so. For if there is one characteristic feature which distinguishes the Mahabharata, as well as the other Indian epic, the Ramayana, from all later Sanskrit literature, it is the grand simplicity of its narrative, which contrasts with the artificial graces of later Sanskrit poetry. The poetry of Kalidas, for instance, is ornate and beautiful, and almost scintillates with similes in every verse. The poetry of the Mahabharata is plain and unpolished, and scarcely stoops to a simile or a figure of speech unless the simile comes naturally to the poet. The great deeds of godlike kings sometimes suggest to the poet the mighty deeds of gods. The rushing of warriors suggests the rushing of angry elephants in the echoing jungle. The flight of whistling arrows suggests the flight of seabirds. The sound and movement of surging crowds suggests the heaving of billows. The erect attitude of a warrior suggests a tall cliff. The beauty of a maiden suggests the soft beauty of the blue lotus. When such comparisons come naturally to the poet, he accepts them and notes them down. But he never seems to go in quest of them. He is never anxious to beautify and decorate. He seems to trust entirely to his grand narrative, to his heroic characters, to his stirring incidents, to hold millions of listeners in perpetual thrall. The majestic and sonorous Sanskrit meter is at his command, and even this he uses carelessly and with frequent slips, known as arsha to later grammarians. The poet certainly seeks for no art to decorate his tale. He trusts to the lofty chronicle of bygone heroes to enchain the listening mankind. And what heroes! In the delineation of character, the Mahabharata is far above anything which we find in later Sanskrit poetry. Indeed, with much that is fresh and sweet and lovely in later Sanskrit poetry, there is little or no portraiture of character. All heroes are cast much in the same heroic mold. All lovesick heroines suffer in silence and burn with fever. All fools are shrewd and impudent by turns. All knaves are heartless and cruel and suffer in the end. There is not much to distinguish between one warrior and another, between one tender woman and her sister. In the Mahabharata we find just the reverse. Each hero has a distinct individuality, a character of his own, clearly discernible from that of other heroes. No work of the imagination that could be named, always excepting the Iliad, is so rich and so true as the Mahabharata in the portraiture of human character. Not in torment and suffering, as in Dante, not under overwhelming passions, as in Shakespeare, but human character in its calm dignity of strength and repose, like those immortal figures in marble which the ancients turned out, and which modern sculptures have vainly sought to reproduce. The old Kuru monarch Dhritarashtra, sightless and feeble, but majestic in his ancient grandeur, the noble grandsire Bhishma, death's subduer, and unconquerable in war, the doughty Drona, venerable priest and vengeful warrior, and the proud and peerless archer Karna, have each a distinct character of his own which cannot be mistaken for a moment. The good and royal Yudhishthira, I omit the final A in some long names which occur frequently, the tiger-waisted Bhima, and the helmet-wearing Arjun are the Agamemnon, the Ajax, and the Achilles of the Indian epic. The proud and unyielding Duryodhana and the fierce and fiery Dusasan stand out foremost among the wrathful sons of the feeble old Kuru monarch. And Krishna possesses a character higher than that of Ulysses, unmatched in human wisdom, ever striving for righteousness and peace. He is thorough and unrelenting in war when war has begun. And the women of the Indian epic possess characters as marked as those of the man. The stately and majestic Queen Gandhari, the loving and doting mother Pretha, the proud and scornful Draupadi, nursing her rat till her wrongs are fearfully revenged, and the bright and brilliant and sunny Subhadra. These are distinct images penciled by the hand of a true master in the realm of creative imagination. And if the characters of the Mahabharata impress themselves on the reader, the incidents of the epic are no less striking. Every scene on the shifting stage is a perfect and impressive picture. The tournament of the princes, in which Arjun and Karn, the Achilles and Hector of the Indian epic, first met, and each marked the other for his foe. The gorgeous bridal of Draupadi, the equally gorgeous coronation of Yudhishthir, and the death of the proud and boisterous Sisupal, the fatal game of dice, and the scornful wrath of Draupadi against her insulters, the calm beauty of the forest life of the Pandavas, the cattle lifting in Matsya land, in which the gallant Arjun threw off his disguise and stood forth as warrior and conqueror, and the Homeric speeches of the warriors in the council of war on the eve of the great contest. Each scene of this venerable old epic impresses itself on the mind of the hushed and astonished reader. Then follows the War of 18 Days. The first few days are more or less uneventful, and have been condensed in this translation often into a few couplets. But the interest of the reader increases as he approaches the final battle and fall of the grand old fighter Bhishma. Then follows the stirring story of the death of Arjun's gallant boy, and Arjun's fierce revenge, and the death of the priest and warrior doughty Drona. Last comes the crowning event of the epic, the final contest between Arjun and Karn, the heroes of the epic, and the war ends in a midnight slaughter and the death of Duryodhan. The rest of the story is told in this translation in 2 books describing the funerals of the deceased warriors and Yudhishthir's forced sacrifice. The poems of Homer, says Mr. Gladstone, differ from all other known poetry in this, that they constitute in themselves an encyclopedia of life and knowledge, at a time when knowledge, indeed, such as lies beyond the bounds of actual experience, was extremely limited, and when life was singularly fresh, vivid, and expansive. This remark applies with even greater force to the Mahabharata. It is an encyclopedia of the life and knowledge of ancient India, and it discloses to us an ancient and forgotten world, a proud and noble civilization which has passed away. Northern India was then parcelled among warlike races, living side by side under their warlike kings, speaking the same language, performing the same religious rites and ceremonies, rejoicing in a common literature, rivaling each other in their schools of philosophy and learning, as in the arts of peace and civilization, and forming a confederation of Hindu nations unknown to and unknowing the outside world. What this confederation of nations has done for the cause of human knowledge and human civilization is a matter of history. Their inquiries into the hidden truths of religion, embalmed in the ancient Upanishads, have never been excelled within the last 3,000 years. Their inquiries into philosophy, preserved in the Sankhya and the Vedanta systems, were the first systems of true philosophy which the world produced. And their great works of imagination, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, will be placed without hesitation by the side of Homer, by critics who survey the world's literatures from a lofty standpoint and judge impartially of the wares turned out by the hand of man in all parts of the globe. It is scarcely necessary to add that the discoveries of the ancient Hindus in science, and especially in mathematics, are the heritage of the modern world, and that the lofty religion of Buddha, proclaimed in India 5 centuries before Christ, is now the religion of a third of the human race. For the rest, the people of modern India know how to appreciate their ancient heritage. It is not an exaggeration to state that the 200 millions of Hindus of the present day cherish in their hearts the story of their ancient epics. The Hindu scarcely leaves man or woman, high or low, educated or ignorant, whose earliest recollections do not cling around the story and the characters of the great epics. The almost illiterate oil manufacturer or confectioner of Bengal spells out some modern translation of the Mahabharata to while away his leisure hour. The tall and stalwart peasantry of the northwest know of the 5 Pandav brothers and of their friend the righteous Krishna. The people of Bombay and Madras cherish with equal ardor the story of the righteous Ur. And even the traditions and tales interspersed in the epic, and which spoil the work as an epic, have themselves a charm and an attraction, and the morals inculcated in these tales sink into the hearts of a naturally religious people, and form the basis of their moral education. Mothers in India know no better theme for imparting wisdom and instruction to their daughters, and elderly men know no richer storehouse for narrating tales to children than these stories preserved in the epics. No work in Europe, not Homer in Greece or Virgil in Italy, not Shakespeare or Milton in English-speaking lands, is the national property of the nations to the same extent as the epics of India are of the Hindus. No single work except the Bible has such influence in affording moral instruction in Christian lands as the Mahabharata and the Ramayana in India. They have been the cherished heritage of the Hindus for 3,000 years. They are, to the present day, interwoven with the thoughts and beliefs and moral ideas of a nation numbering 200 millions. Ramesh Dutt, University College, London, 13th August 1898. End of the translator's epilogue. Glossary of Sanskrit words from the Mahabharata, the epic of ancient India, condensed into English verse by Ramesh Dutt. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Read by Om123. Glossary of Sanskrit words. Avishab, a religious rite. Avishek, sacred ablution. Acharya, preceptor. Ajay, a form of sacrificial offering. Apramatta, without pride or passion. Apsaras, celestial names. Arghya, an offering due to an honored guest. Arya, noble. Ashram, hermitage. Asur, titans, enemies of gods. Aswamedh, sacrifice of the horse. Badurya, lapis lazuli. Brahmachari, one who has taken vows and lives an austere life. Chandan, sandalwood, the paste of which is used for fragrance and coolness. Chauri or chamari, the Himalayan yak, whose bushy tail is used as a fan. Dakshina, gifts made at sacrifices. Dasaputra, son of a slave. Deva, gods. Devadaru, the Indian pine. Devakanya, celestial maid. Devarishi, celestial saint. Dharmaraj, monarch by reason of piety and virtue. Diksha, initiation into sacred rite. Gandharv, a class of aerial beings, celestial singers. Gandhib, Arjun's bow. Ghee or greta, clarified butter. Guru, preceptor. Home, a sacrificial rite or offering. Howdah, the seat of an elephant. Ida, a form of sacrificial offering. Kanka, a bird of prey. Kadir, an Indian tree. Kimpurusha, a class of imaginary beings. Kinnar, a class of imaginary beings with the face of a horse. Kokil, an Indian bird answering to the English cuckoo and prized for its sweet note. Magh, a winter month. Mahut or Mahamatra, elephant driver. Mantra, hymn or incantation. Mlesa, outer barbarian. All who were not Hindus were designated by this name. Muni, saint, anchorite. Nag, dweller of the snake world, also a tribe in eastern India. Nishad, an aboriginal race. Nishka, gold pieces of specified weight, used as money and also as ornament. Pankh, from Sanskrit paksha, wing, a fan. Pisach, ghost or goblin. Pitrimedha, sacrifice and offering due to departed ancestors. Pravargya, a religious rite. Puran, a class of religious works. Purush, the soul. Rajasuya, imperial sacrifice. Raksha or Rakshasa, monster or goblin. Rik, hymn recited at sacrifice. Rishi, saint, a holy man retired from the world and devoting himself to pious rites and contemplation. Samadhi, austere religious practice. Saman, hymn chanted at sacrifice. Sami, an Indian tree. Sankh, sounding conch shell. Sarvavarnin, an Indian tree. Sastra, scriptures and religious works. Savan, a religious rite. Savitri, a hymn, also the goddess of the hymn. Siddha, holy celestial beings. Slesh, an Indian tree. Suparna, celestial bird. Swarg, heaven. Swasti, a word uttered to dispel evil. Swayambar, a form of bridal, the bride selecting her husband from among suitors. Tirth, holy rites at the crossing of rivers. Triratra, a 3 nights penance and fast. Ved, the most ancient and holiest scriptures of the Hindus. Vijay, Karn's bow. Veena, the lyre, yajna, sacrifice, yato dharmas tato jaya, where there is virtue there is victory, yug, the period of the world's existence. End of Glossary of Sanskrit words. End of the Mahabharata, the epic of ancient India condensed into English verse by Ramesh Dutt.